Hey Rocco, it's your Pappy Topher and Chewy, and we thought we would just say hi and spend a little bit of time with you today. We are going to be reading some more Curious George today. So I'm going to have to put Chewy down so that I can read the book. Before we start though, we're going to have a little chat and we're going to talk about the theme of today's Curious George story. It's about getting a job. It's about work. So let me put Chewy down. She had been all nice and comfortable laying in her bed, and I got her up so that she could be in the video and say hi. So she'll probably go back to laying down in her bed now. Let's talk about jobs. So I'm retired now. That doesn't mean I'm really tired or I'm tired again. It means I no longer have a job. And I still get paid because I've got retirement from all the years that I worked, that I saved. But what it means is that I am no longer doing the profession that I spent most of my life doing. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to when I was a kid. The first jobs I had were just household chores. Things I was responsible for taking out the trash. We had a place where we had to burn the trash. We had a place where we had to take out cans and bottles to get rid of them. We had a huge yard that needed to be mowed. So at the time when I was 10, 11, 12 years old is probably the time that I started doing some of the household chores that later developed into jobs. We lived on a farm. So at the time when I was, again, about 10, 11 years old, we moved to this farm and built a house there, and we had cattle, we had hay. So one of my earliest jobs was baling hay. At 12 years old, knew how to drive a tractor all by myself. I knew how to mow, rake, and usually when we were baling the hay, my dad was running the baler and I was on the wagon stacking. So I didn't run the baler, but I did run the rake and I did run the mower and all that other stuff. Eventually, I took those tractor driving skills and worked for some of the neighbors. I worked for Mr. Beckman. I think it was Dale Beckman. It was his name. Was a farmer in the neighborhood, and there were a couple of times he needed me to drive a tractor, basically running a disc or something like that. Usually at the end of the season, and I would do it until after school until late at night. So maybe 4 or 5 hours in the evening after school until it got dark, and even then, the tractor had lights, so I could go until the job was done. I also did some weeding of beans, where you walk through bean fields and cut out the weeds. These were soybean fields in Iowa. I did some detasseling there. Sometimes I was on a crew. Sometimes I contracted a piece of land by myself and did it solo. In high school, one of my first, I guess, professional jobs. One of my first jobs that I paid taxes on and or had taxes taken out of was working at Mr. K's. My sister worked there. She did. They had a little fry station in the back where they served burgers and fried chicken and French fries and shakes and stuff like that. And I would come in once a week, or was it once a week or maybe twice a week? Might have been twice a week. It was at least once or twice a week. And did some custodial work, mopped floors, did some waxing, just general cleanup around the place. That was my senior year in high school. When I went to the university, I worked food service. So anything from, I generally like to work in the kitchen, so I would do food prep, but I also did dishes a lot, either the pots and pans scrubbing area or the general, where all the dining hall dishes come in. I worked those areas, I worked the serving lines. Um, Also, at the University of Iowa, one of my side gigs was donating plasma. I would do that. With plasma, unlike whole blood, plasma you could donate twice a week, and I was at the time making about $100 a month, which was my going out money. It doesn't sound like much now, but that was 1984, 85 when I was doing that. So do the math as far as what inflation turns that into today. One time I did donate bone marrow at the University of Iowa for they were growing stuff in labs basically, and they needed bone marrow to do that. And so I donated that and got paid for that. I did a dental experiment, got paid for that. Those were just one-time things, but yeah, side gigs. Once I graduated from college, I did not get a job in broadcasting and film production or Spanish right away. I had to go back to school before that could ever happen. So I did some telemarketing. I worked in restaurants. I did Country Kitchen. Later in life, I did Village Inn. Always as a cook, never as a server. Yeah, I don't think I would have been very good as a server. But I was a pretty good cook, I think. Let's see. One of the jobs that I had, and I want to bring it up because it's going to come up later, not today, but later in our Curious George book, is I did a newspaper delivery. So I had a newspaper route where I got on my bike and I rode around these neighborhoods, and sometimes I had to run up to apartments and deliver to a whole apartment building. Sometimes it was just through residential neighborhoods, and I don't remember throwing the newspapers. It was always running them up to or walking them up to the front door. But I did that in order to buy my first waterbed when Grandma Amy and I were engaged. It was before we got married. Sometimes she would help me with the route. A lot of times she would keep the newspapers in her car, and I would ride my bike and kind of back and forth between the car. And then I became a teacher. When I became a teacher, first I spent a few years in Kansas and taught in middle school there. And then I got my job at the Juneau Douglas High School, and I worked there my entire time here in Alaska. I also picked up some side money at the University of Alaska Southeast as an adjunct professor there. I taught Spanish at the university level, and yeah, so essentially, from the time I was 12 or 13 years old, which is when I got my first job from somebody other than my parents and actually got paid for it, to the time I was 55 and I retired, I had a job pretty much that entire time. Of course, as a kid, it was just like summer jobs, but I would say after high school, even through college, I worked pretty much the entire time through college. So let's take a look at today's Curious George. If you've got your Curious George book, it is on page 57, And today's title is Curious George Takes a Job. So that's why we're talking about jobs today. So this is Curious George Takes a Job by H.A. We're starting on page 57. And if you want to follow along, here we go. Okay, flip over. There's nothing on 58, but on 59, we see this picture. This is George. He lived in the zoo. He was a good little monkey, but he was very curious. He wanted to find out what was going on outside the zoo. Page 60. One day, when the keeper was not paying attention, George got hold of the key for the cage. Can you see the picture of George taking the key? Page 61. When the keeper discovered what had happened, it was too late. George was gone. Look at George running away. Page 62. Where was George? They looked for him everywhere, but they could not find him. Look at the picture on page 62 and page 63. They're looking all over the zoo for George. Page 64. George was hiding in the hay of his friend the elephant. Finally, the keepers gave up looking for him. Page 65. George found a nice, cozy spot to sleep under the elephant's right ear, and the next morning, before the zoo opened, he got away safely. Look at him. The elephant is still sleeping as George is going away on page 65. Page 66. Once in the street, George felt a little scared. What should he do in the big city? Maybe he could find his friend, the man with the big yellow hat, who had brought him over from Africa a long time ago. Only George did not know where he lived. Page 67. Look at these pictures of the bus. There was a bus stopping at the corner. George had never ridden on one. Quickly, he climbed a lamppost and jumped on top of the bus, and off they went. Ooh, that's not very safe, riding on top of a bus. Page 68 and page 69. There's so many There are so many buildings and so much traffic. There's no room for page numbers. Now they were right in the center of town. There was so much to see that George did not know where to look first. If only he could go riding like this forever. He's having fun riding on the bus. Page 70. But after a while, George got tired and a little dizzy. When the bus slowed down to turn onto a side street, George jumped off. There was a restaurant right in front of him. Something smelled good. Suddenly, George felt hungry. Page 71. The kitchen door stood open and George walked in. On the table was a big pot. Of course, George was curious. He had to find out what was in it. Oops, too many pages. There we go. Page 72. When the cook came back, he had a big surprise. Spaghetti was all over the place, and in the middle of it was a little monkey. George had been eating yards and yards and had wound himself all up in it. Look at the picture of George in the spaghetti. Page 73. The cook was a kind man and did not scold much, but George had to clean up the kitchen and then do all the dishes. My, what a lot of them there were. The cook was watching George. "You are lucky to have 4 hands," he said. "You can do things twice as quickly." Do you see why he says George has 4 hands? George is using his feet the way I use my hands. Monkeys can do that. Page 74. I have a friend who could use a handy little fellow like you to wash windows. If you would like to, I will take you over to him. So they went down into the subway and took an uptown train to the cook's friend, who was an elevator man in a skyscraper. Page 75. "Sure, I can use you, George," the elevator man said. "I will give you what you need for the job. You can start right away, but remember, you are here for washing windows. Never mind what the people inside the house are doing. Don't be curious or you'll get into trouble." He told George not to be curious. Uh-oh. I know George. George promised to be good, but little monkeys sometimes forget. Page 76. George was ready to start. My, how many windows there were. But George got ahead quickly, since he worked with all 4 hands. He jumped from window to window, just as he had once jumped from tree to tree in the African jungle. For a while, George stuck to his work and did not pay any attention to the people inside. Of course, he was curious, but he remembered his promise. Look at the picture on page 77. See the building? See George in the building? He is so high, washing windows. Page 78. In one room, a little boy was crying because he did not want to eat his spinach. George did not even look, but went right on with his work. In another room, a man was taking a nap and snoring. George was sorry it was not his friend, the man with the yellow hat. He listened to the funny noise for a while, then went on working. Page 79. But what was going on in here? George stopped working and pressed his nose against the window. 2 painters were working inside. George was fascinated. Painting looked like a lot more fun than washing windows. Page 80. The painters were getting ready to go out for lunch. The minute they left, George climbed inside. Is George supposed to go inside the windows? Or is he supposed to stay outside to wash them? What's he going to do next? Let's see on page 81. What wonderful paints and brushes they had! George could not resist. Page 82. An hour later, the painters came back. They opened the door and stood there with their mouths wide open. The whole room had changed into a jungle with palm trees all over the walls, and a giraffe, and 2 leopards, and a zebra, and a little monkey was busy painting himself on one of the trees. Then the painters knew what had happened. Look at what George has done in the room. That's funny. He is so mischievous. Page 84. Luckily, George was close to a door. He ran out as fast as he could. After him ran the two painters, then the elevator man, then the woman who lived in the place. Oh, my lovely room, my lovely room, she cried. Don't let him get away. George headed for the fire escape. Page 86. Look at the picture. Look at all the people chasing George down the fire escape. He is almost ready to escape. Let's see what it says on page 87. George reached the end of the fire escape. The others had not caught up with him yet. Here was his chance. They could not jump, but George could easily jump down and escape. In a moment, he would be safe. Poor little George, he had forgotten that the pavement was hard as stone, not like the soft grass of the jungle. Oh no! What happened to George's leg? It looks like it hurts. Page 88. Too bad. The fall broke his leg, and an ambulance came to take George to the hospital. He got what he deserved, said the woman, making my apartment into a jungle. Indeed. I don't think she appreciates George's artwork. I told him he would get into trouble, the elevator man added. He was too curious. Page 89. George had to lie in bed with his leg high up in a plaster cast. He was very unhappy. And it had all started out so nicely. If only he had not been so curious, he could have had a lot of fun. Now it was too late. Page 90. But the next morning, George's friend, the man with the big yellow hat, was buying his newspaper. Suddenly, he got very excited. This is George, he shouted when he saw the picture on the front page. Quickly, he read the whole story, then ran to a telephone booth to ring the hospital. I'm George's friend, he said to the nurse who answered the telephone. Please take good care of him so that he will get better quickly. I want to take him to a movie studio and make a picture about his life in the jungle. Don't let him to get into any more mischief until I can take him away. Look at the man in the yellow hat. He's in a phone booth. You don't see many phone booths these days. Page 92. Finally, the day came when George could walk again. Your friend is going to take you away this morning, said the nurse. Just wait right here for him and don't touch anything. As soon as George was alone, he looked around at all the strange hospital things. I wonder what is in that big blue bottle, he thought. George was very curious. It smelled funny. Suddenly, his head began to turn. He felt as if he were flying. Then rings and stars danced before his eyes. Then everything went dark. What was in that bottle? Page 94. And this is how the man with the yellow hat found George when he came to call for him. They picked him up and shook him, but they could not wake him up. He was so fast asleep that finally they had to put him under the shower. How surprised he was when he woke up. Look at George on page 95. He's in a bathtub with a shower raining water down on him. That woke him up. Page 96. George said goodbye to the nurse and the kind doctor. Then he and the man with the big yellow hat got into the car to drive to the movie studio. In the president's office, George had to sign a contract. Now he was a movie actor. Look at the person in the movie office. I wonder if he's a director. He's the president of the movie office. Page 98. In the studio, George was kept so busy all the time that he forgot to be curious. He liked the jungle they made for him, and he played happily there. Look at the pictures on page 98 and 99. It looks like a jungle, but it's just a movie studio set. Page 100. And when the picture was finally finished, George invited all his friends to see it. The doctor and the nurse and the ambulance driver and the man from the newsstand and the woman and the elevator man and the two painters and the cook and the reporter and all the keepers of the zoo. They're all going to see the movie. It's about Curious George. Look at him on page... Do you see George on page 101? I also see a dog. It looks different than Chewy, but I see a dog in that picture too. I see a couple of dogs. Page 102. It's a picture from the movie. All the people are watching. It's telling the story that we read last time about how the man found George. Let's see what it says on page 103. Now the lights went out and the picture started. "This is George," the voice began. "He lived in a jungle. He was a good little monkey. He had only one fault. He was too curious." That was such a fun story. I hope you like stories about Curious George, because we've got more of them coming up. Remember I told you about delivering newspapers? There's one about Curious George delivering newspapers that we can do coming up. Rocco, it's been so much fun reading stories to you. I enjoy our time together. I look forward to when your little brother Swan gets here as well, so I can read stories to the both of you. You'll have to introduce him to our videos. But until then, rock on, hang loose, peace out.